German Economy Minister Peter Altmaier has said that Germany sees no immediate solution to its trade dispute with the US. Altmaier said that Europe must act decisively in the wake of President Donald Trump's decision to impose tariffs on metals. Trump stunned allies when he backed out of a joint communique agreed on by G7 leaders in Canada. Trump also said he might double down by hitting the auto sector in addition to tariffs on steel and aluminium. The auto sector is a particularly sensitive issue for Germany because it relies heavily on the American market. Altmaier said the G7 summit produced setbacks and that additional US tariffs would not only harm America's allies but also the American economy. Let's discuss this further with Daniel Wrenches, who's live for us in Washington. Daniel, President Trump has lashed out at America's key allies in a string of angry tweets in which he said fair trade is now to be called full trade. What exactly is Trump demanding?
Well, it's true that America, if you look at the broad picture, does have very low tariffs on imports of goods from other countries. There are exceptions to that. Sometimes they impose very high tariffs or quotas or even non-traditional tariff barriers. But so do some of America's allies. So, for example, in the case of Canada, Canada has quite a complicated system to protect its dairy farmers. So Donald Trump's identified this as an issue. The question is not so much about whether people have tariffs or non-tariff barriers, but the negotiating style in this case. So conventionally speaking, here are some of the strategies that you might use. You might just decide to ignore it because the bigger relationship is important to you. You might find ways around it. For example, you might put some manufacturing facilities in the country where the tariffs are usually imposed, but still get the profit from that and still keep everybody happy. You might go and try to renegotiate with the country. You might take it to the World Trade Organization. But what Donald Trump's style is to basically tear the whole thing up and try to get everything on the table at the same time. Normally, conventionally, it takes months and months to try to renegotiate. He wants to short-circuit the system. The trouble with that is it's a very complicated system. There are many different interests. There are many different areas to negotiate. It's a tough thing to do very quickly like that. So the fact of the matter is you can't always get what you want.
So, Daniel, we've covered this dispute in the G7 significantly, but are we giving more attention to this bloc than it really deserves? Does the G7 really matter on the global stage in terms of influencing economic and trade policy?
Well, look, if you look back in the history of these sort of clubs of countries, it really was, a bunch of old white men sitting around leather armchairs, smoking cigars, drinking whiskey and trying to make the deals that they needed to do for each other's countries, and then maybe going out to meet some of the selective media and giving some kind of statement. In the modern world, that's been, made into a much more dynamic industry, whereby you look at issues like climate change, you look at challenges in the financial sector, in the developing world, and you try to get a bunch of policy or agreements on principles to move forward into the international agenda. There are different groups that meet at different times, the G20, the G7, and there are these concentric circles. This is the international system. Trump is not interested in the international system. He does not like the old boys club. He does not like the modernized version of that. And so you have a situation where he's essentially repelling this system. That's where the dysfunction in the international system is growing, and that's why people have been so concerned about this G7.
So we have midterm elections coming in November. Does Trump's angry posturing on international trade ultimately help or hurt Republicans in those elections?
Well, a lot of Americans are a bit like Trump in the sense that they're reflexively a little suspicious of these international ways of doing business. So they like, plain speaking, they like this kind of approach. So from an electoral point of view, many Republicans are trying to now out-Trump each other, saying, I'm more like Trump than you are, to try to gain the ground with the base, the grassroots Republican voter. The trouble is, though, that in many instances, what Donald Trump's doing by having this very aggressive approach is he's seeing reciprocal tariffs being threatened or imposed upon some of the sectors that Republicans care about the most. For example, soybeans, farming products, those kind of things. So a lot of Republicans who are slightly more distant from this aggressive politics are saying, hold on a minute. A lot of this stuff is going to damage our interests. But in the end, the loud voices that you hear that are more aggressive, that are more anti-establishment, anti-international order, they love this stuff that Trump's doing. And Trump is looking at these midterm elections in November and saying, how can I hold on to the House of Representatives? And I think that's fundamentally probably what's driving a lot of this politics for Trump. When you see pictures of Angela Merkel staring over Trump with disgust in her eyes, that is electoral gold to many Republicans.
That's quite interesting, Donald. Thank you very much for joining us. Donald Wrenches live for us there in Washington.